What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over enhanced movement states. So we had walking, idle, and running in our third person tutorial series, and we had a blend space that covers those different animations when we're doing those different actions. So if I'm just walking, it looks like a walk. If I'm running, then it looks like a run. One thing we may want to do in our third person and action RPG tutorial series is only take away from our stamina when we are actually running. So just because we're holding the button in place here, we shouldn't be losing stamina. We should only be losing stamina if we are actively running. So even if we're walking, we don't want to lose stamina. We only want to lose stamina if we're running like this. So see how I'm running and my stamina is going down? If I stop running, even if it's just to keep walking, I should be able to regain my stamina. Before in the series, if I was holding the sprint button, I would be draining my stamina just by standing here because I was sprinting. But now with movement states, we'll be able to tell exactly what we're doing. So if we're idle, we're not going to drain our stamina regardless of what button the player is pressing. If we're walking, we're also not going to drain our stamina. But if we are running, then we are going to drain our stamina. Of course, if I stop running, then my stamina stops draining. That was already working, but it is going to work with this new system as well. Additionally, we'll have a way to actually track what the character is doing. So if I go to my outliner and I go to my base character BP, this is my character that I am controlling. So I already typed it in, as you can see, but you can type in movement state, and this is what we will have in this episode. And now I can see that the character is idle. Otherwise, I can tell that they are walking or running. If I stop running, I go back to walking. If I run out of stamina, I will automatically go back to walking as well. There we go. Now our movement state is walking. Even when I was still holding the button, it goes to walking automatically. Then when I release, we go back to idle. This will be insanely useful. It can be useful not only for animations, but it also can be useful for actual logic in our game. Depending on what state we're in, we may do different actions. For example, if we're in the running state, we may do a different attack when we press a button than if we're in the idle state or even the walking state. Before we get into the episode, I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon supporters and subscribers. Thank you guys for all that you do. Now, if you want to get caught up in the series before you watch this episode, this is all part of the third-person tutorial and action RPG tutorial playlist. So I'll go ahead and link you to the entire playlist right here so you can check out everything we've done to get to this point in the series. Alternatively, if you only care about the stamina sprinting regen system, then I'll link you to the first episode of Sprinting right here, where we covered all of that behavior. With all that said, guys, we can go ahead and get started. We are going to do everything in the code today, so let's go to our code and let's go to our third-person tutorial character.h. The main thing we're looking to do today is to add this movement state. And the movement state is just going to be an enum that tracks what the character is doing. If you watch my other series, you may have noticed that we have like a character state, an attack state. Right now we're going to have a movement state in this character. So the movement state is going to track right now idle, walking, and running. I did put in an other, but I don't actually utilize other. Other could be for things like jumping, crouching, some sort of stealth mode, or a mounting system for horses or other rideable beasts. So you have a lot of different options in this movement state enum. For now, let's keep it simple. So I've made a UEnum that is blueprint type, so we can access it in the blueprint. And it's an enum class called eMovementState. And it is of type uint8, or unsigned integer 8-bit. Once we've made the class, make sure that you add entries to it. So I'm going to have eIdle, eWalking, eRunning, and eOther, all for enum and then the name of the state. The uMeta is the display name. If you were to use this in the blueprint, say you're going to check and see if the movement state is idle, when you go to check this, you won't see e_idle, you'll see idle instead. So you can name this whatever you want. I typically just name it the name of the state without the e and the underscore and put it to all capital letters. But really that's just my naming convention. You can use whatever you want. So we have eIdle, which is idle, eWalking, which is walking, eRunning, which is running, eOther, which is other. Now, once you're done making this enum, we need a variable to actually track this on the character. So we have all of our possibilities for the values of this enum, but we don't have an actual enum to capture it. So we want to scroll down to our variables, and I'm going to go right here. So I've made a new variable called eMovementState, movement state. And this is going to keep track of what state we are in at all times. Also made it uProperty edit anywhere blueprint read write so that we can see it in the blueprint and access it in the blueprint, and give it a category of character. Now let's go into the third person tutorial character.cpp, and we'll go into the constructor where we set all of our default values. And in here, we're going to want to set our movement state to our basic value, our default value, which for me is idle. This means we'll start the game when the character spawns. The character will be in the idle state, which is accurate. That is the state it should be in. From here, we need to go to our move forward and move right functions. Now, move forward and move right are functions that come with the third person tutorial template, so we haven't done much with them. They're just bound to the keys that you have move forward and move right. But if we scroll down to the function, it'll be an if statement making sure that the controller is valid and that there is a value greater than or less than 0 being passed into the function. This way we can either move forward or backward. Inside the if statement, you'll find these lines here, which basically determines the direction that we need to be moving and moves that amount that was passed in. These are input axes, so they are called on tick. Essentially, every frame, these get updated. So as players input their values, when they press buttons on their controller or keyboard, this function fires. Same with move right. I've added an additional if-else here in move forward to check to see if we are sprinting. Going back for a second, sprinting is a boolean that we have in our character here. And to this point, it was used to determine basically if we were able to sprint, including our current stamina and the button that was pressed. So sprint is called when we press the sprinting or running button. Assuming we had the available stamina to be able to sprint, we then went into the logic to say we are now sprinting and disable anything else we need disabled, enable the actual sprinting boolean, and change our walk speed. So scrolling back up to move forward, if we are able to sprint based on our stamina and we are pressing the correct button, then at this point, we know that the value is not equal to 0. So we're either moving forward or backward, but either way, we're moving and we're pressing the sprint button with the available stamina, meaning we should be in the running or sprinting state. Else, if this boolean isn't true, that means that we do have a value that is either greater than or less than or 0, so we are moving forward or backward, but we're not trying to sprint, or if we are trying to sprint, we can't sprint due to our stamina, so our movement state is actually just walking. Move right is essentially the exact same function except for left and right, so we want to do the same logic that we just did in move forward in here. Because if the controller is valid and the value is not 0, it's either greater than or less than 0, that means we are trying to move left or right. And so if we're trying to move left or right and we're holding the correct button with the valid stamina, we should be running left or right. Else, if we're either not holding the sprint button or we don't have the available stamina, but we are moving left or right, we should be walking left or right. We're just setting the movement state to be the correct value, regardless of if we're moving forward, backward, or left and right, and depending on if we're holding the sprint button or just regularly walking. A note before we move forward, sprinting is what we were calling this before because we were using it to sprint. You might want to rename this now to something like is able to sprint, or is ready to sprint. Something so that you know they're both holding the button and have the valid stamina, as opposed to is sprinting, because it's not really reliable anymore, since you could press the button, be standing still, not moving, and you won't be sprinting, but is sprinting will be true. Feel free to rename that if you'd like. Now I'm going to scroll down to my tick function. tick is where we were draining the stamina. Basically, we were checking to see if we were sprinting, and if we were, then deplete the stamina using the current stamina and the depletion rate. If it had reached 0 or gone below it, we just trigger depleted all stamina, which stops us from sprinting, and also it actually hurts us a little bit as a little bit of punishment for being overexhausted. Else, if we weren't sprinting, then we were able to recharge our stamina. This logic is actually all the same except for the actual if statement here. Before we were just checking our is sprinting boolean to do this, but actually we don't want to do that anymore because what I just mentioned, is sprinting is actually like, are we ready to sprint now? The movement state of running means that we are actually actively moving as well as meeting the conditions to keep sprinting. So we only want to drain stamina if we're running, not if we're holding the button and have the valid stamina. We have to be moving as well. So I've commented this out, but I'd actually just remove is sprinting from this if statement and replace it with if movement state is equal to movement state running. Once you do this, we will only drop stamina when we are actively moving and in the running state. So holding the button will no longer just remove our stamina when we're just standing still or doing something else. Like technically, if we jumped in the air and we're pressing the button, we would also be losing stamina. It's silly to drop our stamina if we're not actively running. Now, additionally to this logic in the tick, below this if and else that we just went over, I have one other set of logic here. And this logic basically resets our movement state back to idle. It resets it to the default value. So when we're done moving, we want to set our movement state back to idle. Now, the reason I'm doing this in tick is because move forward and move right are different functions. They're different input axes, so they're called every frame. Well, you can be moving forward and not be moving right. Alternatively, you can be moving right and not moving forward. This means we can't really set our state back to idle in move forward or move right. But we can do it in tick because we can check the overall velocity of the character, including the axis that we want to use, which is the y-axis. And if it's equal to 0.0, then we can set the movement state back to idle. We know that they're not moving at this point. I am going to go ahead and change that is sprinting boolean because I think it's the right thing to do. I think it'll be confusing otherwise. So I'm going to hit Control F on my keyboard and go to is sprinting. Now I have it set to current document, so I'll only find is sprinting in my third person tutorial character .h. I'm going to replace this with is able to sprint. I'm going to now hit replace all. It's only going to replace in this document, so it's going to replace that one. However, if I am to do the same thing in the CPP file, it's going to replace 6 of them. You don't really have to worry about where they are, but if you want, just now search for is able to sprint, and you'll see that it has changed it in the constructor, in move forward, in move right, in sprint, in stop sprinting, and again in stop sprinting. Now, once you've done that, let's go ahead and launch the editor again. I have to stop it, so I'll catch up with you when the editor is back open. Be aware that if you did use is sprinting in any of your blueprints, you should go into them now. I'll go into a random one like base game mode BP. I will go to find results and I'll type in is sprinting. And then I will hit find in all blueprints. And you can go in and replace them. If they have any errors, just change them to is able to sprint and your problem will be solved. But that's all I got for you today, guys. We have our improved sprinting system, so thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. If it helps you, please consider becoming a patron or YouTube membership subscriber to support me further. Thank you so much for everything, guys. I really appreciate it. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. I'd be happy to help you with any of the problems you ran into, and it is completely free. Anyway, guys, like I said, that's all I got. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.